Excellent, excellent. Thanks so much for everybody for joining. So welcome to the session. My name is Lee. I'm the head of accounting partnerships here at Satago, and what we're all about is trying to make sure that your cash flow is covered by ensuring that you've been paid and you've got that money in your business to then go and do what you need to with it. And what better way to learn about getting paid than from getting some tips from a debt collector. So I'm delighted to welcome Alex. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Alex. How are you doing?
Yeah, really good, Lee. Thank you for the invite, and looking forward to sharing some of our experiences in terms of getting paid on time.
Excellent. And so for anyone on the call that isn't familiar with you or your work, could you just give us a quick potted history to your background and Hilton-Baird?
Yeah, so we founded Hilton-Baird. It's actually our 25th anniversary this year in terms of founding the business, and I guess our whole world, similar to Satago, revolves around helping customers getting paid on time. So we've got lots of experience providing debt collection, and just holding hands with businesses and helping them recover debts when customers don't pay on time.
Absolutely fantastic. And so it's a huge challenge for businesses, right? Especially small businesses, I suppose, that it's maybe the same person or small team that have to go out and win the business and then do the work, and then it falls to them to go and chase that that money afterwards. One of the I guess vehicles to try and speed up payment is to use late payment interest and kind of add that to invoices. But I think there's a lot of tension around that and a bit of wariness from customers around using that because they feel it might harm the relationship. Like, what do you think around that, and what do you see your customers doing?
So I think first of all, there's probably still too much of a stigma attached to actually asking to get paid on time from the UK. I mean, in Britain, we're terrible at kind of asking for money. There's a lot of countries where kind of credit control, Australia or America are probably the leaders, where they have no issue at all about picking up the phone and saying, we've delivered the goods, delivered the service, please can we be paid? And I think if the pandemic showed us anything, it's actually, companies can pay each other on time, because we saw debtor days reduce significantly as people kind of rallied around each other during the pandemic to support companies. So I think we kind of need to open the conversation up, and there is no issue in terms of picking the phone up to your customer and actually asking for payment. Nobody should have a problem with that. I think back to your point in terms of small teams, if you're out selling, if you're out kind of delivering the service, the challenge is probably finding enough time to do that and do it regularly enough that your customers are then educated to pay you on time. Question about late payment interest. I think absolutely it should be on every invoice. The fact that you've got the right under statute to charge it, and I'd say more often than not, when we look to recover debt, we will always add it onto the invoices, and probably 7 times out of 10 it gets paid without being contested. So I think it's more and more accepted as a collections tool.
And is that fear about the impact to the ongoing relationship, is that an unfounded concern? Have you ever seen people sort of fall out with their suppliers for charging that?
I think some suppliers, they might get a bit grumpy, but at the end of the day, they should pay you on time. There is no excuse. If they haven't disputed the invoice, there's no reason why they shouldn't pay to the terms which have been agreed.
Yeah, absolutely. So the kind of excuses around late payment often become the sort of challenge, don't they? Or checks in the post, I guess, is the one. Although I don't know how relevant the check in the post is anymore now. It's all done by BACS or other methods. But what's a good way that you found to try and cut through the sort of nonsense excuses versus the sort of genuine reasons why payment might be a little bit late, or the customer might be struggling a little bit?
So I think I guess the key thing, I'll definitely come back to kind of the excuses. The most important thing, I guess, is before you sell to somebody is to really know that customer.
Yeah.
So we would always kind of advise people before they're going to actually release goods to somebody or provide a service, that they've actually done some kind of KYC on that customer, so they know who they're getting kind of into bed with from a business relationship, and at least they've done a credit check on that business to check that the business is worth the credit limit that they're going to be extending to them. Because I think it's very easy sometimes, very tempting to chase turnover, but we've always got to remind ourselves that the turnover doesn't really count until we've actually kind of been paid for the work that we've done. Yeah. And I think underpinning that kind of credit check is really important, to have a good set of terms and conditions that support the goods or services that you're selling to your customers. And it depends on who you're dealing with as a customer, whether you'll be selling to them on your T's and C's, or if you're having to accept their terms and conditions. And again, if you have to accept your customer's terms and conditions, make sure you read the small print and kind of fully understand everything that you're signing up to, in order to supply them. I think if you can do those two things in terms of credit check and get the terms and conditions right, then many of the excuses kind of fall away, because you've agreed everything up front, and therefore there shouldn't be excuses that follow through.
Yeah, definitely. We tend to talk about that quite a bit with certainly with our customers and the accountants that I deal with. That the idea of credit control, people tend to think of that as just being the chasing bit, but in reality, once the invoice is gone, so is the control, right? Because now you can only influence at that stage. So the T's and C's, getting the credit checks done, all that sort of stuff is really where you can actually control the process, isn't it?
Absolutely. And a nice tool that we find kind of upfront is kind of a welcome letter, welcome pack, which can be a simple PDF, but what it does is it just sets out that relationship between you and your customer, in terms of you can get your T's and C's across to them. You can have an account opening form, so you log exactly who the invoice needs to go to. You remind them at that point of your bank details, what your payment terms are. So you set your stall out from day one. And we find that if you can educate your customers from the get-go, then typically late payment, they push that into somebody who's less organized than you, because it's a lot easier for them to do that, and they tend to pay people on time if you're kind of quite strict and disciplined with them.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned an interesting point a minute ago around it's no good having the turnover or the sale if you're not ultimately going to get paid for it. And I think I've seen this. I think most people have seen the sort of tension that exists between salespeople in organisations, and then maybe the back office finance team, or the people that think about the risk and they want to credit check stuff, and they will maybe want to put the brakes on a little bit, whereas a salesperson wants to rush ahead and get a deal closed. That can be a really challenging dynamic for a leader of a business to try and negotiate, can't it? Because they sort of want to have both of those things. How have you seen people tackle that challenge or that problem, or how have they put processes around that to make sure that they get that balance right?
So ultimately, there needs to be a decision from the owners, the directors of the business, about what the credit policy is for the company. You're not going to last very long in business if you sell to people who are never going to pay you. So ideally, you need a credit policy that is kind of fit for the industry and sector you're trading in. But most importantly, it really needs to be written down, and it needs to be communicated across the whole of the organization, from sales all the way through to credit control. And then it needs to be stuck to, from the point of view of, if you've agreed you're going to give X amount of credit and customers don't pay you on time, the credit control team needs, customer services, they need to have the ability to put them on stop, and sales need to be on board with that. So it needs to be clear, written down, and communicated, and then stuck to.
Yeah, and I guess from a salesperson's perspective, it would be useful if you've got that policy nailed down within your organisation, to make sure that finds its way into the sales process, and they become qualifying questions that your salespeople ask right at the beginning, to disqualify a potential customer if it's not going to meet the requirements of someone that we'd want to do business with.
So we often see kind of best practice actually bringing sales into that process by, if there's any commissions involved within sales, although those are paid and received when the customer pays, not at the point of sale. So they're highly motivated to sell to people who are eventually going to pay you. So if you can tie those two together, again, it kind of just gets everybody on the same page.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess having that link through to what the customer actually pays in the end helps eliminate a lot of the other sales tactics that people might resort to, like heavy discounting or things like that, because they know that actually it's what hits the bank that I get paid on. So that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of things here that businesses need to do right. So having these policies in place, spending the time in the sales process to do this sort of stuff, going through the credit checks. There's tools like we have in Satago that can kind of help with that, but it's still time that needs to be spent on it. And a lot of organizations are challenged on that front, right? They don't have a lot of time to spend on these sort of things. Where should they focus their efforts in order to get the best results or the best return on the time that they can spend on this sort of stuff? What are the tactics that will make the biggest difference?
So we've covered the bits kind of in terms of knowing your customer before the sale. I think then the next crucial thing that is kind of you need to get right in the chain is actually the invoice itself. So the invoice is kind of fundamental to getting paid on time. We've got an example from the Made Up Plumbing company online, but it just highlights some of the points that that sometimes get forgotten on the invoice. So coming back to knowing who you're dealing with, you've got to kind of make sure that when the invoice is addressed, it gets to the right person. And email's helping that a lot now, because it means that you can get it into somebody's inbox and you can track it. It's not kind of getting lost in the post or not making its way to the right person. But again, depending on whose terms you're trading on, your customers might have a specific format or way that they need to receive invoices, and that's going to vary according to the different customers that you deal with. You may even have customers where you're kind of hooked up to them on some kind of EDI link where they're automatically accepting invoices out of your accounting package. So again, just knowing the accounts payable system of what's going to trigger a payment for you at your customer's end is hugely important when you come to kind of create your invoice and make sure you get it to them. I mean, one area where things often get overlooked, where we pick up an invoice and try and collect it for a customer after it's not been paid, is it just doesn't contain the right reference numbers to allow payment to happen. So that's typically a purchase order number from the customer. So if they require any references or numbers on the invoices to accept them and process them, then just make sure that those are a part and parcel of what's getting input into your system when you take an order, and then it makes its way through to the invoice. You've got to make it also easy for customers to pay you. The number of invoices we see which don't contain any payment details or bank details, especially if you're dealing with companies overseas, don't just give them the sort code and account number. Make sure you've got the SWIFT and the IBAN number actually on the invoices. And back to late payment and terms and conditions, make sure that that's referenced within the invoice as well. The fact that you've got the right to charge late payment and collections fees, but also reference your terms and conditions, that you're submitting this invoice on the basis of T's and C's, and then you've also got recourse to all of those terms and conditions if you need to enforce anything further.
And I think what's really great about those points in there is that this is, if we're thinking about the time aspect of it, this is one and done in a lot of these cases. You set the template up once. You don't have to keep worrying about it. Then you've got these things on there. I suppose the unique reference for the supplier may change, but this is process stuff that you can set up at the beginning and then sort of continue to rely on.
Yeah, absolutely. And once you've done it once properly, then you click a button and it kind of goes, and it's there. And you talked about the excuses. One of the excuses we normally come up against is we'll never receive the invoice. So having an electronic PDF copy just means that as soon as you get that, you can get it straight back out again to the relevant parties. You can also then kind of escalate it if you need to somebody more senior in the organization if you're not getting kind of anywhere with your normal kind of accounts contact.
Yeah, absolutely. We're trying to dig into the data we've got inside Satago at the minute to try and determine certain interesting things like when's the best time to send an invoice, or what are the best sort of length of terms to use to ultimately get paid quicker. Do you have any anecdotal stories on that, or anything that you've seen work particularly well in terms of kind of the time to send the invoice during the month, or the amount of terms to actually give?
So I think the amount of terms is a commercial negotiation, depending on the sector you're in and how much competition there is. People will, try and win work based on, giving extended terms if possible. But again, we'd caution against that unless you're dealing with creditworthy companies that are going to be around in 30, 60, 90 days, depending on what terms get negotiated. In terms of actually generating and sending your invoices, ideally as soon as you've delivered the service. Don't wait to the end of the month, because if you delivered it in the first week of the month and you can invoice kind of as soon as you finish the job, then why wait another 3 weeks before you get it on a potential payment run? You're just giving credit away that you don't need to. And lots of companies still do a monthly invoice run, so you probably find that if you do invoice at the end of the month, you're going to get held up with everybody else's invoices coming through, so you probably get paid slower doing it that way around.
Yeah, we definitely see a big spike in Satago 7 days after the end of the month, and then 14 days after the end of the month of reminders going out, which indicates that a lot of people are just waiting until that last day of the month when, as you say, everyone else's invoices are landing at the same time, which I guess then means that everyone else's reminders are going to be landing at the same time. With those 7 and 14 days, it's easier to get lost at that point. So we can build all these processes, we can get a great setup of an invoice, but obviously there's lots of talk at the moment, isn't there, about costs going up and businesses getting squeezed on cash flow, and maybe some of those bounce back loans starting to run out and things like that. So there's every likelihood that people on the call or their clients might come up against businesses that just say, look, I really want to pay you, but it's just tight at the moment. I know we've agreed this in the terms and conditions, but can you give me a bit more? What would you recommend with that? Would you recommend giving them more, or does that become a bit of a slippery slope? Like, how would you caution people to deal with that?
Again, it comes down to relationship, how well you know them, ultimately how much you can trust them, and basing that on fact in terms of the credit referencing that you've done up front. A good way to mitigate some of that is obviously having credit insurance. But again, credit insurer will expect you to stick to kind of the terms that you've set out with that customer. Depending on industries, we're seeing if the company doesn't have a strong credit rating, we're seeing some companies taking guarantees from the directors of that business to continue supply to them. So I think it depends on the quantum, how much is outstanding, and is it a material sum that could either hurt your business, or when you step back from it, do you really think that the business can't find that $5,000 to pay the bill, or are they just paying somebody sooner who's jumping up and down a bit more than kind of maybe you are? Again, I think it comes down to just kind of being consistent with your customers and educating them, and from our experience, they do then just push the pain of late payment into people who are a bit more lax in terms of those systems and processes. But a great way to kind of continue building that relationship is not waiting until the invoice is actually due before you talk to your customer. Is actually speaking to them, on a pre-due date call to make sure that firstly they've had the invoice, there's a payment kind of in the system that's on the payment run, and just to iron out whether there's any issues at all. So back to terms and conditions, one clause that we'd always kind of advise people to get in there is that any disputes need to be raised within X number of days of receiving the goods or service. If not, they're not considered valid, because you don't want to wait to the end of 30 days, 60 days before somebody raises a dispute, and then you go back to square one in terms of waiting for that period again. So I think pick up the phone early, especially to the ones where maybe they've paid a bit late in the past. Make sure you're talking before the due date, and that they know that you're on the case. Yeah,
we're a big advocate of that, as well as sending reminders or making a call before things are due. And even if that's just to say, look, are you happy with the invoice or not, and get that sort of signed off. So it's a great tip. And so, as you mentioned, it depends on relationship, right? And sometimes we may need to give a little bit of ground or step outside of the determined policy sometimes for the right client in the right circumstances. But if we get to a situation where maybe that's happened and we're still not getting paid, and it needs to come across to an organisation like Hilton-Baird to then pick that up and escalate it and go somewhere with it, what are the things that businesses can do that make your job easier and then ultimately give you the best chance of recovering that money for them?
So I think it's underpinning the sale with all the things we've talked about. It's having robust set of terms and conditions.
Yeah.
It's having copy of the invoice at your fingertips, including the late payment, because that's always some kind of leverage that we can use in terms of, ultimately doing a deal with a debtor to get paid. And then it's making sure that you've got that proof of delivery, because often once they've requested the copy invoice, which they've never had but have had, they'll then be asking for, proof of delivery. Actually, well, can't see that we've had these goods, or can't see that we've signed off that we're satisfied with the work that you've completed. So it's having that complete paper trail from start to finish, which makes our job easier to then say, this debt is valid, it's due, we expect to be paid now. The clock is kind of ticking. And again, escalating it early to a debt collection agency just means that they know that the problem's not going to go away. And again, typically results 90% of our debts get paid before going legal. So it brings them to the table in terms of actually making a payment, and then again that late payment gets pushed into somebody else who's not really on top of kind of collections.
I think that's possibly the perception that a lot of people have, and maybe even myself as a layperson thinks, well, as soon as I engage a credit or a debt collection agency, that's probably going to go legal. That's going to mean I'm going to have to pay kind of small claims court fees and all these sort of things, and the cost escalate. And you maybe think, actually, I don't want to get into that. But knowing that stat that you can actually recover 90% before it gets to that point, I think can give people a lot of confidence. Actually, it is worthwhile escalating to that point if necessary.
Yeah, legal's a last resort. I mean, you're always unfortunately come up against some debtors who they just will never pay until you actually get to the steps of the court. And those are the ones you just need to avoid dealing with in the future, because it's just too much hard work. But the majority, if they know that they've had value for money, they will come back with a settlement or a payment plan if they're struggling to actually make the payment. So
fantastic, excellent. So Alex, that's fantastic. We've hammered through the time so quickly. There's been so much useful stuff in there that we've almost got to the end of the session. So we'll open it up for a few questions. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them on the call if we can. One question from me, Alex, just to kick things off. Again, I think the perception around engaging a debt collection agency is that it's really expensive, right? And you'll almost, by the time you've got through the fees, you'll kind of struggle to actually have got anything back. I know it's going to depend on the scenarios, but are you able to give an indicative kind of range of costs that people might be looking at if they had to kind of engage an agency to get stuff back?
Yeah, so I guess the first kind of rule of thumb is you shouldn't be paying big fees to any agency up front for debt collection. Our industry revolves around kind of a no-win, no-fee basis, so we're incentivized to collect. So don't part with big sums of money up front. We charge, and we have a special kind of offer for Satago clients and kind of prospects of Satago, where we charge a £25 admin fee to load a debt onto our system, and then depending on the age of the debt and the size of the debt, we charge a percentage of what we recover. And if it's less than 3 months old, it's 7.5%. If it's between 3 months and 6 months old, it's 12.5%, and then anything over 6 months is 17.5%. So it's purely related to kind of the age and size of the debt.
Fantastic, excellent. So we've had no questions just yet, but if there are questions that come in a little bit later, or if there are any questions from the people that are watching on demand, what is the best way that they can get those questions to you, Alex?
I think if they come on to our website, Hilton-Baird Collections, and then /Satago, they can take advantage of the offer, or via the email address which is on screen. We can answer any questions they might have, and our team are always happy just to chat through any scenarios and give some advice in terms of what might be the best approach with customers in terms of getting paid quicker.
Fantastic, excellent. So just to quickly recap some of the biggest tips that we've talked through. So the first is to understand your customer well to begin with. Make sure you've got the foundational T's and C's and good credit policies to start out with before you start engaging with people. That makes the selling easier, helps your salespeople be on the right page, bringing you good business. There's a load of tips to get through on making sure the invoice is right. Is there a copy of that PDF that you shared that people can find anywhere, Alex?
Yeah, that's a resource on our website, so readily downloadable, as well as lots of other kind of credit policies and credit management handbooks that people can download and use.
Fantastic, excellent. The next one is stick to the policy where you can. If there needs to be some flexibility, make sure you've got a strong paper trail on that. If any of you are using Satago, you'll know that we capture all that stuff inside of there anyway, so any chaser emails are automatically caught, and you've got space in there to leave notes and things like that as well, which then means if you need to engage Hilton-Baird or a kind of collection agency, then you've got that paper trail to make sure that's going to be as effective possible, and also engage and do things early. Kind of don't wait. It's really hard to add urgency to a process if you haven't shown it yourself. So get the invoice out straight away, engage with escalation if you need to before it gets to the last resort, and make sure you've spoken to your customers before things are due. I guess it's all just about being proactive, isn't it, and being on top of things.
Yeah, and just talk to your customers. There's nothing better than, if you've got a good relationship with them, they're going to find it harder to pay you later than somebody who doesn't take the time to either say thank you for the business you do together, or keeps in touch with them. So it's all about relationship.
Excellent. Alex, thank you so much for your time. It's been really, really useful. A couple of comments are coming in and saying it's been helpful. So thanks so much for that advice. And for any of you on the call that want to learn more, the details are on the screen just now. All that remains to say is thank you for joining us, and we will see you again really soon. Thanks so much.